This is Gail Morgan welcoming you to the Libertarian Counterpoint. Now, your host, James Just.
And we want to thank you for joining us this afternoon or evening, whenever you get a chance to watch us. And I guess some of you actually get to watch us at, 2 a.m. or something. There's some ridiculous time we're on in the morning. So it's like, if I remember.
Favorite time, I think it's 4 a.m. Saturday. I get up, have a cup of coffee. No.
Yeah, we're on 3 times. We're on 3 times in the week. So you get a few chances to take the swing at us, but we thank you for spending the time with us. Speaking about spending time, China has been spending some time with the citizens of Hong Kong. A New York Times article actually called it a form of brainwashing, where essentially the new Chinese security law has created, I think behind the cameras, John mentioned the Stasi of China, and it's essentially the same thing. They've controlled your thought, they're controlling where you do, who you talk to, and how you say, and please report on your neighbors or your family if they say anything wrong. And it's this drumbeat of continual oppression, and it's sad to watch.
I mean, Hong Kong was one of the freest countries in the world, much freer than the United States before the mainland China crackdown, particularly economically. It's not anymore. It's simply becoming a clone, an exact replica, a copy of mainland China. I've got some experience having traveled extensively in China, and I can tell you, having an interesting conversation with a tour guide. The tour guides, by law, have to be members of the Chinese Communist Party. They have to be. You know, if you're a tour guide, you're a Communist Party member. And so we got to talking, and the tour guide took us through not just China, but also Tibet, which is another vassal state of the Chinese government. The Tibetans don't want to be controlled by the Chinese, but they in fact are. And it's a garrison state. It's really interesting to look at the capital of Tibet, Lhasa, and see all of the garrisons, the huge military installations in the capital city, which are manned by Han Chinese. They've taken over the culture. They've taken over the government. They've taken over pretty much everything in Tibet. Now they're doing it in Hong Kong. I'm guessing that Taiwan is next, despite whatever smoke blowing the United States does in opposition to it. It's a totalitarian form of government. It works if you are willing to follow the party line. The tour guide was very candid behind closed doors when he knew that the cameras weren't on and nobody was listening. He said, it's just something we've got to do. We have to be a member of the Communist Party. We have to be very, very careful about what we say in public. We have to, as long as we don't do anything that's going to upset the Communist Party leadership, we're fine. We can go about doing business as much as we want. Capitalistically, China, even Hong Kong, China, mainland China, even Tibet, are all more capitalistic than the United States. It's just in the area of political expression that they simply are not.
Yeah, I would say there's when you talk about garrison countries, I remember not that long ago that the United States kept garrisons in an awful lot of vassal states, and I think probably viewed by many of the people there in a similar way, maybe not with as much fear of the Chinese government, because they're not the ones that dropped atomic bombs. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But to go back to this you have to toe the party line, and you have to be careful about what you say, and as long as you don't threaten the Communist Party, then you can go about doing business and you'll be fine. Feels a lot like this country now to me, that the wokeness, you have to be very careful about what you say, things spoken off the cuff, seemingly. Where I see it is I follow sports, and the sensitivity of people to comments that you have to look really, really hard to find offense to in the sports world is insane. Like a sportscaster made a comment about a guy's gold necklace and called it a bicycle chain, and he was almost hounded out of his job because that was somehow politically incorrect. and questioning any of the tenets of the deep state in this country, like the lockdown nonsense, which has been nothing but a disaster. Don't question global warming / climate change, whatever day they call it, whatever they want, because that's a given. Don't question whether more government is a bad thing. So I think we're seeing that here. I don't know if the level of fear is there that there might be in communist China, because we're not carting as many people off to prison as political prisoners here. We have an awful lot of people in prison. Is China, Richard? Does China have? China still has less of its percentage of population in prison than we do here, right?
Yeah, even when you count all the Uyghurs or whatever they are in eastern far western China. And talking about political correctness, that's the play-by-play guy of the Kings who said all lives matter. Now I understand how that can be offensive to black people, but is it a firing offense? Well, it was for the Kings.
Yeah. And then firing for if you fire someone who goes against the political status quo for violating wokeness or whatever the new level of perception is, that's completely okay. But if you were to fire someone because they belong to the Communist Party or fomenting, the collectivization of private property or anything else, you would be in court, and that would be firing somebody over a political offense. So it's a weird triple standard that I do not understand. But then again, I'm the oppressed minority of old white guy, so I just don't get it. And I don't know if I ever will. I always thought we had this thing called the First Amendment, and you could voice your opinion and without repercussion.
Well, it's
we're actually talking about a First Amendment thing.
We actually do. We've got coming up right next with the Supreme Court, which actually tells us the slight difference we have between us and China. The Supreme Court has ruled that California violated the First Amendment rights by demanding donor information from charity groups, nonprofits. California was demanding these information be given to the government for some reason. Never could understand the logic behind that. But the Supreme Court has said, no, you cannot do that. And which is, I suppose, the difference between us and the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has the ability to do what they want. And at least we pretend, I suppose.
Well, the alleged reason was to prevent fraudulent charities from getting more traction than they would otherwise. But in fact, that law was never ever used for that reason. And in fact, the law was never enforced until Kamala Harris became Attorney General, and she came down with a hammer on the law. And that's why a couple of organizations filed suit or basically said we're not going to comply, leading to the Supreme Court decision, which said you don't have to. And it's a real simple principle. I mean, you've got people from groups ranging from the ACLU to Pacific Legal Foundation, where we have some experience, where donors who contribute to these organizations could put their lives in danger to people who oppose what those organizations do. The Unabomber is made a direct threat to Pacific Legal Foundation. And if you are a donor to the Pacific Legal Foundation, who's to know that some Unabomber type who disagrees with the environmental policy or the property rights policy or whatever wouldn't go after the donors themselves? The state supposedly was keeping that information private, but in fact leaked it on their website of all places. Anybody who wanted to find the list of donors of any organization didn't have to be a hacker to do so. It's a great decision, and I'm only disappointed that it wasn't unanimous. I think it was 7-2.
Well, and there still exists a nationwide, when you make contributions to political candidates, that information is part of the public knowledge. You can go to a database and search and find a person's name who gave to local Republican candidate, or local Democratic candidate, or the
Or me,
Libertarian
yeah.
candidate. And you can find out how much they gave and all the rest of that. And then in this day and age, you can spend, a lot of times you don't have to spend any money, but you can spend, I think $30 a month and get access to a couple of services that allow you to drill down and find out where a person lives, where they have lived, what their email address is, what their phone numbers are, who their relatives are, what business that they've been in. And if you can find out who and how much someone donates, you can then drill down and find out where they live. And the state of California has never been very good with data, or I think their technology stopped with wired telephones, where they got confused between 3 pieces of wire and 2. And so their ability to keep that information secret, even if it was used for what they want, which is fighting fraud. And the state of California, Franchise Tax Board, and the Board of Equalization have tremendously astute, believe it or not, people in their fraud departments. They are really, really good at finding people who pretend to be other people. The unemployment development, on the other hand, not so good. They sent like 500 checks to a person in prison. But the guise of fighting fraud was always a guise. It was simply that the people in power on the left wanted to keep tabs on and really go after the people on the right and the supporters and make life difficult for them. And
it was a tool of intimidation.
No
It was a tool of intimidation by Kamala Harris.
As which is, if you
and the people who keep the data happen to go to the same cocktail parties as the people who would want the data, and so there's this notion that they're going to keep it quiet. It's never worked before, and they just quietly pass it on by word of mouth. You don't actually have to hand over a email file. You just remember a few names and you hand it. And you tell it to the person at the cocktail party.
I think we saw this happen on a national level when it's a felony for people who work in tax organizations, either at the federal level or at the national or at the state level, to reveal financial information that is obtained as a result of tax forms. Yet we remember in the last election, I think, that somehow Donald Trump's income records from his federal tax returns were released to the public. I don't remember.
Well, they were leaked to the New York Times.
Yeah, leaked to the New York Times. I don't remember reading an article after that about this person going to prison for violating that. But
they were never ever apprehended, as far as I know.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it's a double standard. It's the deep state. It's politics. And anytime they say we want to put this law in effect to cut down on fraud, what it means is they want to put the law in effect to cut down on freedom. You just have to replace the word fraud with freedom. First 2 letters are similar, they're the same, but after that, everything's different. Just remember that, viewers. Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and move on. There was an opinion piece in the Los Angeles Times this week about the Los Angeles masking guidelines are actually undermining the vaccination efforts, because telling people that, you've got masks, but now you've got vaccinated, but now you still have to go about and wear a mask. Well, then why the hell am I going to get vaccinated? Mm-hmm. What's the point? And so there's the very efforts to keep clamping down on people who've been vaccinated kind of are contributing to the reluctance to be vaccinated. And we actually talked about this a couple months ago, that some of these guidelines they're doing are actually harming their own cause. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking these things through.
I mean, the masking and the lockdowns, they were never about the virus. They were always about experiments in controlling people and seeing how far you can go in controlling people and keeping them buttoned down and other politicians' hair. That's what they're about. What's interesting now is that the mainstream media, namely the Washington Post of all places, is finally figuring out that, hey, we maybe need to backtrack a little bit here. And so they got a guy that I think it was a doctor at Johns Hopkins or some similar prestigious organization to say, hey, you know what? This simply makes no sense to require that vaccinated people wear masks. It makes no sense to have lockdowns when people are already vaccinated. And the only thing that we're doing is we are destroying confidence in public health authorities. That may not be a bad thing, actually.
Well, and I think generally it isn't a bad thing. The fact that I think it's actually a good thing in that there's a carryover. If you identify public health as being part of government and the government establishment and the bureaucracy and all the rest of that, and start to see how ludicrous and ridiculous their recommendations are. For example, they told people to stay home, and it turns out that most transmission of the fluid or COVID or whatever you want to call it, whatever virus that caused this or was the tool to allow this pandemic to happen, was transmitted at home. So if you see these so-called experts in power in public office and the real power, the high levels of bureaucracy, as being either incompetent or blatantly having a hidden agenda that you've now identified, then I think it causes people to step back and look at all the other things they've taken for granted, that all the other messaging they've received from all the political types, whether elected or in the deep state. And I think that's a good thing. The problem with it is if there ever really is a basic health tenet that people need to follow, and you know, with modern media, we have the ability to push information out. It might not be right. Then people might choose to do stupid things. But if you're told to do stupid things repeatedly and you realize it's stupid, when that organization actually puts out good information, you're going to ignore it. So, I mean, there's good and bad to this, but I think the good overwhelms the bad. The good overwhelms the bad. If people then become more willing to trust their own circle of experts, you know, like how you pick a restaurant. You know, you don't go to some government agency and say which restaurant that plays mariachi music that serves a good taco. You ask your friends, and you check with people who've been there, which is, you know, how the world has worked forever. And as we get away from experts and more to dealing with people we trust, I think we'll all be better off.
Yeah, well, talking about people we trust, we've talked about our Madam Vice President a couple of times here already. But she's been accused by multiple people in her own office of creating a toxic work environment. And then to kind of prove the point, she went off and the office called them cowards for going around and leaking this information that the work environment is toxic. I mean, it's like you wouldn't prove. If you go and prove the point, it's kind of absurd. Now, those of us in California who pay attention to these things are not surprised.
No,
but
we're if you know, that's nothing compared to what Kamala has done. I mean, when she was a DA and Attorney General, she did some blatantly, grossly illegal and immoral things, withheld, you know, exculpatory evidence in a couple of capital crimes, basically condemning people to death if, you know, they would have not uncovered accidentally something that helped them get off later. So that, you know, the fact that someone who's acts like that in a position of power, controlling lives, would be bad at creating an environment of openness and trust is not a shocker at all. I think we in California would have been shocked would be a mild word if that kind of reputation didn't come out of organization. You know, I mean, it's not like there's a...
Yeah, I mean, Kamala Harris is truly an evil woman when it comes right down to it. The exculpatory evidence on capital cases, the prosecution of low-level pot offenders and then smoking it herself. The list goes on and on and on. She's a hypocrite. She's driven by one thing and one thing only, and that's personal power over others. And she is so close to getting it in being the anointed for a presidential nominee in the 2024 election. I shudder in fear that she becomes not just an ineffectual laughingstock vice president, but becomes an actual president. That is my
ineffectual laughingstock president.
The problem is, once you're president, even though you may be ineffectual, you've got the whole of the executive branch behind you, particularly when you're a Democrat, and she could do some real damage, not only on foreign policy but also on domestic policy. She is a tyrant to be feared.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, because she's only interested on the one thing, on promoting herself and pushing herself into, power, whatever that actually means to her. And who knows what that's going to be. It's, in a sense, she's worse than Trump because she's actually has a competent team working for her. And, that actually would make her more dangerous than someone like Donald Trump. But speaking of Donald Trump, the New York City has been having their mayoral elections, and it's been littered with problems. Imagine that. It's just the number of problems.
The thing about the New York City, the election board is it's entirely entrenched in the political parties. The people who run the election system are split between Democrats and Republican machines, mostly Democratic machine, and since it's New York, but equal numbers of both Democrats and Republicans. They're out for the party's interests, and I have a sneaking feeling that this whole thing might be an attempt to discredit ranked choice balloting, because ranked choice ballot voting was brought into effect by, if I remember right, by a referendum in New York. This was not something the Democrats or the Republicans came up with on their own, and I'm sure they don't much like it. So if you can make the election, the first mayoral election that uses ranked choice voting, a total fiasco, which they've managed to do, then what's the most easy thing to do? You just blame it on ranked choice voting and take no credit whatsoever for the disaster that you, as the election board, have created by yourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of machinations, or is it machinations, that politicians do, which is, one of the reasons that most of their actual workplaces are so toxic, because they don't ever go at anything straight on. What they do is they say one thing, and whatever they say is exactly the opposite of what their goal is. So I think that's very astute of you, Richard, to think that it's probably an attempt to be grossly ineffectual and in order to get rid of ranked choice voting. I think you're probably right.
And it was strange how it came about. An independent group actually was the ones who discovered it. It's not like they even discovered it. It ended up being 135,000 test ballots were left in the system when they started to count. Now, I've run assembly lines. That's simply quality assurance procedures, which they clearly don't have. So, this is a procedural issue.
Well, I think maybe back to Richard's point is that this is intentionally bad. And what the reason why it's intentionally bad, I don't know. But I think Richard's
I don't want to contradict my own point. I don't want to contradict my own point, but
I do.
We are talking politicians here, and they don't have to be intentional to be incompetent and bad.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, you can never rule out incompetence when you have politicians at
well, I know. I think you should rule incompetence in. I think that should be your first. Everybody looks for these deep, conspiracies, and my brother loved the man. And it just, he'd always say, "What, John? You've met people in government, right? I can't go talk as slow as he does, or else the show will be over." And I'd say, yeah. And he said, "Do you really think any of them can keep a secret?" And so my answer to that is no. So incompetence is the first choice. But there are some, I know I'm going sideways, but on Kamala Harris, the Backdoor, the website that was it called Backdoor? The website that a lot of prostitutes were using to directly present their wares to sex workers to the public, prevented I don't know how much violence and how many murders, because it took pimps out of the loop. And now that that's gone, they're back in the loop, and we can lay that right at the feet of Kamala Harris. So I'm sorry I had to throw that in there, but I want to make sure people.
Yeah, well, we want to talk about incompetence. Sacramento has spent millions on homelessness, and even more families than ever are homeless. Mm-hmm. And it's the more money they spend, the more homeless we're getting. But it's actually not the money we're spending on homelessness. It's because we're not dealing with the actual problems of we've removed low-end housing. We've made housing deliberately more expensive. We never actually deal with it structural issues at play. We just throw money at the problem and pretend we're doing something. And
there's no.
Well, and then you hit the key point, the structural problems of how we manage the economy, both at the federal level and at the state level, are the cause of homelessness. When you've got zoning laws that make it impossible to build small homes, tiny homes, when you've got zoning laws that make it impossible to build whatever home you want to in whatever neighborhood you want to, and when you've got local laws that say this land is not available to be built on for any reason whatsoever, when you've got county laws that say you can't, that any house has to be more than 800 square feet or some arbitrary number. Those are the things that cause at the local level. Those are the things that cause homelessness to be a problem, because it drives up the cost of home building. At the federal level, you've got a Federal Reserve System that systematically and over many decades now has been practicing financial repression. And by that I mean they have been lowering interest rates so that savers can't save any money, meaning you can't save enough money at good interest rates to come up with a down payment for a home. At the same time, they have been inflating the currency, which causes inflation, which causes the price of homes to go way beyond what working people can afford. Many working people can afford. So what you have is a whole lot of people at the lower ends of the economic game not being able to afford housing anywhere, and they still live in California because, hey, California has clement weather. It's a lot better than being homeless in Minnesota. I can assure you of that. And they're not going anywhere. And then the remedy in San Francisco, they set aside land for tents, and I forget what the number was, something like 60. The cost came down to like $60,000 or some ridiculous amount per tent just to set aside the land.
Yeah, you could have literally paid the homeless $5,000 a month.
And I want to throw something else in, is that there is now an entrenched bureaucracy that makes its living from homelessness. So you got to fight through that as well. And I would think the simple solution is just substandard housing. Everybody says, "Oh, it's substandard." No. Compared to sleeping on the pavement or in the back of the car, any house is way above substandard housing for these people. Sometimes you have to adjust standards to help people, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, and we are just about out of time, so I want to thank everybody for coming. I thank Richard and John for joining us today. I want to thank all of our viewers for watching us. You can catch all the links to these articles we use at libertariancounterpoint.com, and you can send us any questions to counterpoint@libertariancounterpoint.com. And thank you for watching, and please remember to love everybody.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you,
Thanks,
Richard.
James.